Hello, we're ready for a live with CCO. We're at episode 68. Got an interesting topic. I can't imagine that you guys would be surprised that we're going to talk about heat, heat stroke, heat exhaustion, the medical coding information and tips regarding heat illnesses. When you look up these codes, they are under um, the results of heat and light. That is what's going to be the trigger for these codes. Anyway, it is an opportune time to be talking about them, and we're going to start with heat stroke. Now, heat stroke is actually the most severe of the problems that can happen due to heat and light. Um, the This is the one that can be fatal, and it's important to understand the differences if you're going to be coding these. And you know how much I like talking about the disease process itself. So that's one of the things that I wanted to cover. I went straight to the CDC because that tends to be, even when you did research in these conditions, everybody pretty much cited CDC. The verbiage is all the same. So just going straight to them is the way to go. That is helpful too for you to know that when you go to do research, that you're careful about who you're getting the information from. And the CDC is, when you're dealing with medical standards and definitions, that will be a reliable source for you. Then jump out to things like Mayo Clinic, MD Anderson, etc. Those would be reliable sources for disease processes and MD answers and cancer and things. So per the CDC, they are letting us know that heat stroke is, again, like I mentioned before, the most serious heat related illness. We're going to start at the top and we're going to work our way down to the least severe. Ultimately, what happens is the condition progresses to the point where the body can no longer regulate its temperature. The temperature of the body starts to rise very quickly. We know our internal core temperature is 98.6. That can, you know, there's a few little degrees there that you can go up and down, but no, we're running right there at 98.6. It gets, your core temperature gets a little too low, going to cause a problem. Gets too high, going to cause a problem. We are set up to run like a well-oiled machine, and what happens when your car gets too heated? Things start to break down and fall apart. Uh, when we deal with heat stroke, again, the body ceases the ability to regulate its temperature anymore. There's different ways that the body regulates its temperature. It's all initially done through the uh, central and peripheral nervous system. The brain tells, because of the receptors in the peripheral nervous system, tells the body that we're heating up, and therefore it opens up the pores and you start sweating. And ultimately, what sweat is designed to do is that having liquid or water on the surface of the skin allows the body to cool off. So getting wet cools the body. And then if we can lower the outside temperature, then that alleviates the inside core temperature. Again, opening up the pores it helps regulate the temperatures inside the body. When you have heat stroke, then your internal temperature can go up to 106 degrees. And if that lasts for more than 10 or 15 minutes, then there's going to be permanent damage to the body. It happens in several ways. It can exhibit itself. Uh, uh, I mean, it's like frying an egg. We don't want that to happen. And uh, our internal organs are extremely sensitive. Think, I don't want this to gross you out or anything, but how many of you like liver and onions? Right? If you've ever cooked liver, then you know the texture and the density. It's not very dense, liver isn't, but it cooks very fast. It heats up very, very fast. In fact, one of the ways to ruin cooking that meal is to cook it too long. It just takes less than a minute. It's kind of like searing. Well, our liver is the same way, and so you can imagine what heat would do to your internal organs. Uh, and I see Laquita mentions that kidneys play a big part, and that is absolutely true. In fact, we're going to see the output here in just a moment. We're going to talk about that and how that will show one of the signs and symptoms. There is no more output. You can't. Your kidneys shut down. They don't. You can't urinate. So if you go over 106 within 10 to 15 minutes, the body is going to have permanent disability and death can ensue quickly. Um, Now, if you have ever seen, in fact, they're running you, there's a commercial that's going out around now, and it's talking, again, we're all over the nation, so I don't know if it's playing in your area, but one of the things that it's talking about is getting a meningitis shot. And if you get meningitis, your body can recover from that. A lot of people die of meningitis. The reason that they die, one of the reasons, is their body heats up. You run a fever. And so if you survive meningitis, you usually have deficits. One of the deficits of a high fever is loss of hearing. So you can go deaf. You can lose extremities, especially lower extremities, lose a leg or both legs, infertility. And that is just the tip of the iceberg of things that can happen. You could have loss of kidney function. And again, these are things that will last. So they are like sequelas of the heat stroke itself. As we talk about heat stroke, let's talk about the code itself. The code for heat stroke starts out at T67. Now, it is again noteworthy that if heat stroke isn't managed quickly, then it can result in death. But heat stroke isn't the first stage. It is like the end stage before a person can die. The code again, T67.01. The sixth character is an X, and I need to change that. In the little purple box, that is supposed to be that the seventh character is A, D, or S, meaning it's going to be the last character, if is it initial, subsequent, or sequela to heat stroke, as I mentioned before. So, what are some of the signs and symptoms that happen with heat stroke? Remember, when you're doing outpatient coding, you're not going to code the signs and symptoms. However, heat stroke is an emergency. So, you're going to see these patients coming into the emergency room. The only time that you're going to see this code in the outpatient setting is going to be with subsequent or sequela. The initial encounter is going to be the ER, or they'll, if they come in for whatever reason to the outpatient setting, they're going to be transferred to the ER. Uh, Anyway, the signs and symptoms to be aware of is going to be confusion or altered mental status. Again, the brain is starting to boil, and it won't be able to function. Slurred speech, loss of consciousness, hot, dry skin. The reason that we see hot, dry skin is that the body has lost its ability to cool itself off, right? So it won't be opening up those pores and making you sweat. Now, that being said, another right before that happens, you'll have profuse sweating. So the body kicks into gear and it's trying really hard to rapidly cool itself off. And once it stops, once the sweat dries off of your skin, it's done. There's no more fluid to pump out to the outside surface of the body, and then you get hot, dry skin. Seizures, this is something that, especially in the summertime, if a person has a seizure just out and about, and they don't, the family says, oh, they don't have epilepsy, they've never had a seizure before, then that would be a heads up. Has the person been outside? Have they been hydrated? This could definitely be an indication that the body has heated up to the point that the brain's literally glitching out. It's the body telling you that it cannot keep up whatever state it's in. And then the other sign and symptom is that it's a very high body temp. So we know that low, um, uh, what am I trying to think of? Fevers, low fevers, low grade fevers. That's the word I'm trying to say. Sorry, that wasn't slipping off my tongue. Low grade fevers, 99, 100. That is your body fighting something, right? That is normal, and it's a good thing because, again, the body's immune system has kicked in and it's fighting. However, uh, there are times when the body heats up to the point because of an illness. And when you get, over 101, then that's a little concerning. But once it gets over 102 and 103, that's very concerning. And you need to figure out a way to get that down, especially in small children, infants and children. Their body doesn't have the ability to regulate temperature as well. Well, they just don't have as much body surface to regulate the temperature like an adult. Now, an adult, when you get up to 103, you're pretty miserable. Um, and so, very high body temperatures is, if you get past 103, you better be in the ER. Something's going on, or your body's not able to regulate, and therefore you could have damage. And one of the causes of very high body temperature, if there's not an organism involved or trauma or something, is heat stroke. And again, that is that last level of the body's done, and then you succumb. Uh, the T67.01X, X is part of the code. It is not a placement holder. That is allowing for the code to be expanded because we want to use a seventh character, not a sixth. Yeah, that's initial, encounter, subsequent, or sequela. That's built into T codes. Heat exhaustion is what happens before you go into heat stroke. It's more common. The signs and symptoms are there. They're somewhat similar, but this is not a predecessor to death, put it that way, or severe injury. Now, this is severe. This is important and needs to be treated quickly. Uh, but the CDC tells us that heat exhaustion is how the body responds to loss of water and the salt that it needs. And it usually happens through sweating. So, this is going to affect the very young people, the elderly, the maybe there well elderly people get dehydrated more so than we see that happening in little ones. If a person has high blood pressure, they're at a higher man, I'm stumbling over words. They're predisposed to heat exhaustion. also if you're working in a hot environment. And you have to be very careful because it's not it's to the point where water is not enough to replace what the body needs. You have to replace the salts and the electrolytes in the body. We have to have that sodium in our system because our body and our heart specifically runs off of chemicals. It runs off of chemicals as well as um, the muscular component and the electronic component of our heart. And you mess up those balances, that fine-tuned engine that I mentioned before, then it would be like not having any oil in your car, right? It's going to burn out something very quickly. With heat exhaustion, you'll notice that the signs and symptoms, these seem very familiar to you, I'm sure, but somewhat similar. This code is going to be T675. However, the their the code might not always be 5. It could be point 0.3 or point 0.4. We'll talk about that in a moment. But it also has the seventh character as A initial encounter, D subsequent, and S sequela. So the symptoms and the signs that you're going to have for heat exhaustion that you'll see documented by the provider: headache, nausea, dizziness. You won't probably get vomiting because there's no fluid. Weakness, irritability, very cranky. You're uncomfortable, and not only are you getting disorientated, but you get cranky. Thirst. Once you get past the point when you're not thirsty anymore, that's a problem. And that being said, I'm going to get a sippy here. You need to constantly be sipping on liquids to help the body replace the fluid that you're losing when you're working in a hot environment. Heavy sweating, because the body can still regulate. The body is still trying to regulate in heat exhaustion. But when you get to heat stroke, the body can't regulate anymore. It's shutting down. So you will see heavy sweating, elevated body temperature. However, unlike heat stroke, which is a very high body temperature, this is where the body temperature is starting to rise. And then, as Laqueta mentioned a minute ago, decreased urine output. The kidneys are being affected. They're slowing down. They're not able to produce output because there is no fluid left to do that with. Now, if the the regular heat exhaustion is point 0.5, however, point 0.3 is called, let's see, anhydrotic, and that just means you're not sweating. And then point 0.4 is due to salt depletion. Now, if the provider documents heat exhaustion and you have no other information besides the signs and symptoms, then point 0.5 is where you're going to go. However, you will see documentation for this anhydrotic, and you will also see that sometimes documented the salt depletion. These are specific different diagnoses. So that's what you need to be aware of and look for. Uh, uh, they may not know right away. If they may initially say it's heat exhaustion, but then when you're in subsequent and sequela, then you may see, instead of that point 0.5, you could see the point 0.3 and point 0.4, where they've done testing or been able to confirm a higher specificity than point 0.5. So be very aware of that. Now we're going to talk about this really interesting condition, and actually I have the phonetic here. It's rhabdomyolysis, rhabdomyolysis, and I put the phonetic in there for you. But a lot of times they just say rhabdo, because who wants to say rhabdomyolysis? Myelosis. And I always say ly, I say lee. So I say rhabdomyolysis, but that's not correct. It's myelosis. Not that that's a big deal. I always am kind of wonky about the way I pronounce things. So Rhabdo is a condition where heat stress and prolonged physical exertion causes a heat exhaustion type condition. This is where the muscles start to be affected and breaking down. Now, what happens is you have heat exhaustion and heat stroke, but in between all of this, you have this rhabdo, and you can also have this condition by itself, not be heat stroke or heat exhaustion. One of the things that was noteworthy, I remember that my father-in-law had heat exhaustion and had gotten heat stroke one time in his life. And the doctor had told him he said, you'll be sensitive to heat the rest of your life due to this. Now, I don't know why, if that's just a trigger for the body, that once the body recognizes, hey, this happened to us one time, we're not ever going to let that happen to again. So we start having signs and symptoms sooner than other people would, and for warning, maybe that's kind of the way I looked at it. But what happens also is this rhabdo condition can can occur, and it's directly affecting the muscle. The muscle can die in in the body, and also remember, we have muscles inside our body, muscle tissue, besides just the muscles that allow us to move. Our heart is a muscle. So, we want to remember that. Uh, when you have muscle tissue that dies, uh, then that cannot be recovered. It can't heal itself. Death of muscle tissue is like brain tissue, it's dead. Now, that doesn't mean that rest of the muscles can't compensate. However, it's compensating. You're not going to get that back. Now, this can cause things like irregular heartbeats. It can cause seizures also. And like Laquita said, it can definitely cause damage to the kidneys. The kidneys aren't able to get past this. Now, what are the signs and symptoms to rhabdomyolysis? It's muscle cramps and pain. The muscles are struggling. We need those electrolytes and that salt to keep our muscles going when they're being exerted. There's different tests, like lab tests like creatine and things that, and you may hear from commercials, people that exercise a lot, they're always taking extra creatine or creatine. I call it creatine. I know that my number one son, he's really into working out. He's always been very active in doing that, and he pays close attention to that um, component of what he drinks before and after a workout. And I only mildly listen to it. But I do know that is some of the testing that's normally done, and what we're checking for is to see if the patient is dehydrated, or what chemical imbalance is happening in the body. Muscle cramps and pain is an indicator of that. Asymptomatic, meaning there may not be any symptoms. You're without symptoms. That's what asymptomatic means. It could creep up on you and then you just have damage. Exercise intolerance. You could exercise in the past, but now you can't. Or you're just, if this is a condition that happens, you can't tolerate exercise. Weakness, because why? We've affected the muscles. That's kind of a no-brainer, right? Heavy sweating. The body is still exerting itself and trying to compensate. It's like pushing against a brick wall and it's not going anywhere. So what do? You keep um, uh, excreting that effort and thus sweating. Elevated body temp. Again, you're burning energy. The muscles are trying to work, and kind of also think of your uh, a car squealing its tires and not getting anywhere. And then again, back to the kidneys, abnormally dark tea or colored urine. If you drink iced tea or you put a soda over ice and you look at it and you see that the light come through that, you hold that up, that's what our urine looks like. If you ever have urine that looks that dark, you need to go be seen. That is a red flag that your kidneys are struggling. Now, notice the signs and symptoms and the differences in each one of these conditions. The indicators that are similar, and you can see how it could be a step-by-step process. Uh, Note too that heat exhaustion and heat stroke are T codes because that is injury due to heat and light, whereas rhabdomyolysis is an M code, which has to do with muscles. They are distinctly different diagnoses, although the person could have rhabdomyolysis after having heat exhaustion or heat stroke, and this could occur often. Or the way the body's going to react to severe heat after you've had a bout of heat exhaustion or stroke. Our bodies are pretty savvy, and it knows how to protect us, even when we don't seem to have a common sense to get in out of the heat or pay attention to the signs and symptoms when we're working outside in the heat. If you're dealing with temperatures that are in the 90s and the hundreds, then it doesn't matter if it's a dry heat or a wet heat, because I know when I'm in Texas, we all say, oh, well, it's a dry heat. It can be 114, but if you're in the shade, it's not miserable, right? That's true, but it is still an oven. So you have to stay hydrated. And you can be in a lower heat with the humidity that makes the body struggle more. It affects the lungs and such. Laquita says, can you have rhabdo without having heat exhaustion? Yes, I believe you can. I had done some more research and I looked at that, and what I think happens is some people, not really predisposed, but I think it happens to a lot of athletes. And it's not necessarily that they have heat exhaustion. It is something that happens when you're doing strenuous work and you're in the heat. So you can, I believe, have rhabdo without having heat exhaustion or heat stroke. Uh, uh, Although you notice that what it's doing is it's directly affecting the muscle, whereas heat stroke and heat exhaustion, the brain is being affected. So there's the two separations in that rhabdo. And that's another reason why it's an M code versus a T code or even a G code. A G code would be anything dealing with the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system. But the brain is that control center. And if the brain is being affected, also T codes are injury codes, whereas M codes deal with the muscles and the skeletal system. It's a diagnosis versus a different type of diagnosis, where if that makes sense, versus injury to the body. That is it. I realize that I left a slide in there that didn't mean to be in there. Don't forget that that was the seventh character that I was talking about, not the sixth character for those last characters in the code for the code set. Uh, this is really interesting to me because not only we are always dealing with heat in the summer. I know that when it's winter, we complain about the cold, and maybe we'll do an interesting topic on frostbite and having the opposite of the heat when we get into the middle of winter. But we're always complaining and wanting to be warmer in the winter, and vice versa in the summer. And when this is being aired live, we are in the midst of heat, aren't we? So that's kind of fun to talk about that. But we also see these conditions come in more prevalently, right? Makes sense during the summer and active times of the year. Don't forget these conditions occur when you're out playing in the sun. It isn't necessarily a sports condition. It could be just out boating. You could be out fishing. You could be doing lawn work. You're exposing yourself to heat over a long period of time until the body isn't able to acclimate itself. And that also can happen when you're physically in a job where you have to be out in the heat for long periods of time. Don't forget that you can stop by cco.us. We've got all kinds of freebies and fun things over there. And if you have a topic that you'd like us to discuss in one of our CCO lives, absolutely let us know. It's real easy to find us there at cco.us hyphen topic request or /topic hyphen request. And we enjoy unpacking those ideas or questions that you have, giving you ideas on how to research on your own, and teaching you more about all of the code sets. All right. Thanks, guys. We look forward to seeing you again next time.
Do you need more medical certification and business training? Learn more at www.cco.us.